This is the Gentle Rebel Podcast, episode 309.
The Gentle Rebel Podcast.
For introverts, highly sensitive people, and creative misfits.
Hello and welcome to the Gentle Rebel Podcast, where I explore how to live a more meaningful life as a sensitive, creative type person without getting overwhelmed by all the noise and distractions and absurdities and hostility of our modern world. My name is Andy Mort. I'm a songwriter, a performer, a big old introvert, a highly sensitive person, all that stuff. And I love helping other gentle rebels find the courage and perspective required to make their own quiet stand for what truly matters in life to them. As I say, welcome to episode number 309, where today I want to talk about the idea of static. I apologise if you hear the sound of pigeons cooing throughout this episode. There seems to be a lot of pigeons outside. It's that time of year where they're kind of, chasing each other around and fighting for some reason. I don't know what that's all about. So yeah, I can't believe it's been a month since we last spoke on this podcast. Well, I kind of can, but I can't. I think, I've had many discussions about time recently and the fact that time has lost a lot of its kind of meaning, a lot of, our grasp of what time means. Like days seem to be going by really fast. One day to the next is just like bang, bang, bang. I'm making my morning coffee, and then before I know it, I'm making tomorrow's morning coffee. And I look and I'm sort of journaling, and before I know it, I'm journaling again. But when I think back to the start of this kind of lockdown situation, it seems like years ago. Likewise, it feels like we've only just had sort of, Christmas. But when I think about what I was doing at Christmas, like specifically, that seems like a really vague, distant dream. So yeah, it's kind of strange how situations like this can just throw all the normal stuff up in the air and create odd, perception shifts. And I don't know about you, but I've been having some weird dreams and that kind of stuff as well. So yeah, I hope you're doing okay. I really, really do. Whatever you're kind of facing right now, I know it's completely different for everybody. Everyone is in really kind of different situations within this same boat, and that's kind of something I need to keep reminding myself of. My experience is not the same as yours. It's not the same as the person that I kind of walk past on my morning walk. And yeah, although we're kind of all experiencing the same general state of common weirdness, the nuance of our situation is different, and we must hold this idea with kind of grace and gentleness as we interact with each other, and to not assume that we know how others are doing or what they're coping with personally, or how they're how they're kind of dealing with what they have to deal with. And so I want this podcast to just be a bit of an encouraging virtual hug to give you some companionship and support through this time, whatever you're having to deal with personally. And what I guess I do on the general on the podcast in general is to explore ideas and then look at how they can, help us live with more calmness, more perspective, more compassion, and thus more meaning in our lives as people who can find the common assumptions and expectations of our modern world kind of overwhelming at times. So before I get into this episode properly, I just want to point you in the direction of the Haven. We're about to start the summer season over there, so doors are closing in a few days' time. If you're listening to this as I've released it at the end of April 2020, that's when the doors are closing for the summer season. I've really, really loving the community since lockdown began. There's been a little shift in, we've been exploring some really nice ways of sharing space together. Started a kind of weekly co-being meeting where we're checking in on Zoom, working on things. It's like, co-working space where we just sort of kind of quietly work on things alone together. Some people are reading, writing, crocheting. Someone was even making face masks in one of the sessions, and people work on admin stuff, research, that kind of stuff. The atmosphere is really, really beautiful. It's kind of a real drop of what the notion of Haven kind of means to me in my head. So, I come away feeling really peaceful and serene, and also like I've accomplished something as well after one of those sessions. So, yeah, almost everyone has commented on the fact that being together in the call makes it easier to focus on stuff that otherwise gets kind of pushed down the list of things that are important. as urgent stuff takes over. So yeah, for me, this is definitely something massively positive to come out of this situation. If this kind of gentle community with space, encouragement, and tranquility to stay rooted and calm sounds like something that you would benefit from, then really, I encourage you to come and try it out. There's a 2-week trial. You get access to everything during that time, and you can just see if it's it suits you, if it's something that you want, that you'd find useful. So it'd be lovely to meet you in there. If you're watching the video version of this, then you'll see me. I've kind of been putting together the stuff for the physical post recently. So like I send out every few months, a little letter and a magazine and some postcards, which have come out quite nicely. So these guys with quotes and invitations to what's going on in the next 3 months. So yeah, I mean, post's nice, isn't it? Because we all love to get real mail nowadays, when all we otherwise get is bills and junk. So yeah, that's the Haven. Come and check it out. thehaven.co/join. So it's the-haven.co. There'll be a link in the show notes as well. Cool. So in the last episode, I invited a bunch of friends to contribute their responses to a couple of questions on the theme of connection, which felt like a really important topic to explore at the time. I was going to do this same kind of format again this time because I really enjoy it. Like it's quite nice just getting all these different voices sharing from different perspectives and backgrounds on topics. But I couldn't find the right questions to add the value that I was looking for in discussion. And also, kind of because of the issue with time, it got away from me, and I was like, oh man, I've only got a few days before I'm supposed to be releasing this episode. So I think it's, I don't know, for all these reasons, I'm not going to do it this month. And this, I said at the beginning, static is this word for this month. And just like connection, it wasn't actually my original plan for this year's topics. I had a completely different word written down for the April episode. But something Jacob Nordby said last time really kind of struck me, and it's a word that feels really appropriate. He was talking about static. I think in your social media feed and in your inbox. And I know this word means different things and conjures a whole range of thoughts and emotions. I mean, this whole situation requires us to be static, locked down, where we are with no movement, stuck, anchored, imprisoned even. And we're going to explore that side of things in a bit. Then there's this idea of static as noise. It's the white fuzz that you see on the TV when there's no clear signal. It's that kind of black and white snow thing, white noise, no focus, no clarity. And then there's static as a shock, as a charge, as an electrical charge because of an imbalance in charged particles between two surfaces. The ultimate example being lightning. The positively and negatively charged particles separate within the cloud and create this spark to neutralize either within the cloud itself or between the cloud and the ground. So yeah, there's loads of different elements to this word static. And I'm going to break this episode into 3 sections to reflect these main areas. So stillness, noise, and shock. And as we attempt to navigate this crisis, and hopefully it will be relevant beyond this crisis and in other areas of life, I just feel it might be helpful to really get beneath these ideas and think about how to bring awareness and transformation into our lives through this word, static. I get the feeling there's a lot of us, there's a lot for us tied up within this word. Like that idea, the whole tree sits within an acorn. I like thinking of the growth that sits within a single word, like this seed. A word is a seed, and that's one of the reasons I love doing podcasts around a single word. That out of that word, as I prepare, as I reflect on words, out of that grows this tree that sits within the word. As I water it in the right sort of way. It's a bit of a strange metaphor, but But yeah, I mean, that's how I like to think of inspiration. You know, it's allowing things to grow out from within something rather than us casting something upon, you know, a canvas, upon something, whatever. You know, and Alan Watts talks about this being one of the key differences between sort of Eastern and Western approaches to philosophy and religion and spirituality and all that sort of stuff. You know, in the West, we talk about this idea of sort of being born into the world, and in the East, there's a familiarity with the sense that we grow out from the world. And it might sound like a kind of semantic difference, but the way that it shapes so much of how we conceptualize other things, you know, how we root ourselves, how we think of ourselves in the big picture as humans on the world. It kind of plays a part in that sort of concept. And I really resonate with this idea, especially because it spoke to me of the kind of exceptionalism that we carry as humans, you know, this sense that we are on the world but not truly part of it. But times like this with the pandemic is a real reminder that we are part of this. We are vulnerable, we are connected. And within that sort of vulnerability and humility, the forced humility nearly, it's a kind of really needed, beautiful reminder. It's scary, obviously, as well, because it holds a light up to our mortality. And yet there is nothing more life-giving and focusing than this kind of reminder that actually we are fragile. This life is fleeting, and we truly get to choose how we spend the time and energy that we have. And that is really brought into focus at times like this. You know, I've been kind of struggling myself over the past few weeks, more than I think I realised for a little while, both with the lockdown itself, but then going back to work, dealing with the reality of this kind of situation as an undertaker. You know, it's been obviously pretty tough, pretty weird, pretty different. And so, I mean, from the perspective of like dealing with the sheer volume of work, like it's gone crazy. The number of you know, people we're bringing in, funerals that we're doing, and all that sort of stuff. And also the nature of how the funerals have changed and the struggles with social distancing in the context of grief and mourning itself. You know, it's really, really tough for people. There's this kind of increased irritability I've noticed in myself as I've kind of just been sort of ploughing on and doing the job. But yeah, there's I don't know, I'm being mindful of it, trying to give myself space and time to just kind of anchor down in a positive way. And so I guess this idea of stasis, coming from the word static, being the core of balance and weightedness and solidifying something firmly in place. These ideas are really important to think about for me at this time as well, to kind of, find those things to anchor into when the normal ways of processing, the normal ways of sort of decompressing maybe from the kind of emotive baggage that comes from a job like that, when those things are missing, to kind of find new ways to do that within the particular context. So these are the two sides of static as stillness. You know, on the one hand, it's balance and rootedness and stasis and solid foundation. On the other hand, it's stuckness, being somewhere without the ability to get away. You know, lockdown, the very idea of lockdown itself, that word, you're locked down, you're imprisoned, so on. And this takes me to what the minimalists say about anchors. I remember finding this a rather kind of weird and challenging idea to get my head around at first, because you know, the notion of being anchored has always felt like a positive thing. It's like a compliment you can give somebody, like, oh, you're a very anchored person. Anchored people are good people. They have their stuff together. They're kind of reliable and trustworthy. But in the section on this topic in their book, Everything That Remains, the minimalists write, an anchor keeps a vessel at bay, planted in the harbour, unable to explore the freedom of the sea. Interesting, yeah. So the idea that the boat is unable to explore the freedom of the sea, this was something I was like, that's really not, that doesn't compute properly in my head with my kind of the connotations of what an anchor is or what an anchored person is. I mean, also, isn't that the point? You know, an anchor is a tool to prevent the boat from drifting away with the wind or the current. You put it down deliberately because it's like, yeah, I want to keep my boat so that, you know, I can hop off, or I can sleep on it without waking up and realizing, it's drifted out into the middle of the ocean. But as they unpack the idea, it kind of makes more and more sense. They'd followed this desired description of being very anchored. They'd conformed to it through their early 20s. They'd climbed the corporate ladder. They'd bought property. They'd appeared well adjusted to the norms and expectations of the world around them. And with that accumulated plenty of debt and plenty of possessions. But this anchoring was stopping them from exploring the world that actually they wanted to see, the world that would give them more meaning, that sense of like, actually, we're somewhere perhaps we don't want to be. And that's why this phrase, unable to explore the freedom of the sea, is their lens, rather than an anchor keeping a vessel safe from drifting away from the harbour by the current or the wind. An anchor is actually a negative in this sense. And so, like static as stillness, anchors aren't innately good or bad. They're tools. And I've been sharing a kind of 3-part series over the past few weeks about really looking at my aha moment when I discovered what it meant to be an introvert, and then delving into introvert as a label, and then the relationship that we have with labels, and the fact that labels, again, they aren't innately good or bad. They're just tools that we can use, and that can lead us into good things, but it can also lead us into potentially kind of more harmful things or damaging things, depending on the relationship that we have with it. And so anchors, in this sense, they're the same. It's our relationship with our anchors, our awareness of what they're enabling us to do or restricting us from doing. That's what's important. Yes, a bad anchor can render you unable to explore the freedom of the sea, but anchoring in the right place can also give you the freedom to be able to explore the land. It can give you that sense that you don't have the fear of losing your boat as you commit, as you put your anchor down in a particular place, and you commit to that, whatever it is, for whatever length of time you need to be there. It all depends on what the anchor is and how it fits with our personal desires and values. For me, I feel a need to be anchored right now. While I deal with the craziness of the world around me, I need to be plugged into certain habits, certain routines, for example. And I can't give in to the temptation to start new projects. That pressure, I don't know if you've been feeling it, like you've got to make the most of this once in a lifetime opportunity, write the book that you've always dreamt of writing, and do the things that, now you suddenly have all the time to do. I mean, on the one hand, I don't have all the time to do it. But also the kind of emotional pressure and stress of this kind of situation, for many, that can just add to that baggage that we're carrying, trying to lug around with us. For so many of us, this kind of messaging is really anxiety-inducing. This sense that we've got to pull the anchor up and go exploring the freedom of the sea, even though we're not actually ready for the trip. We don't have any food supplies. We haven't got the crew on board. Haven't worked out actually where we would even want to try and get to. We're just like, get the anchor up and go. Just go anywhere. It doesn't matter where you go. And that's bad. All we know is the conditions are good for sailing, and that's not enough. We're going to end up in trouble if the conditions won't be good all the time. So get out a little bit, and then we'll end up burned out and overwhelmed and wondering how we got to where we are without any sense of protection from the storm. Anyway, I've laboured that metaphor as I tend to do. So yeah, on the one hand, this can be a great opportunity to make steady progress on important things. On the other hand, it's a great opportunity to just anchor down and just, find a sense of acceptance with it all, to become okay with boredom, to water the various important roots of our lives. I think of the 12 parts in Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way, recovering a sense of safety, a sense of identity, a sense of power, a sense of integrity, a sense of possibility, a sense of abundance, a sense of connection, a sense of strength, a sense of compassion, a sense of self-protection, a sense of autonomy, a sense of faith. These 12 things to recover are rooted in that sense of acceptance with where you're at. You can't reach those senses unless you give yourself time and anchor to the place where you're willing to go there. And through that book, she says you're going to sort of dredge up all sorts of stuff that it's probably not going to make you very comfortable. But that's up to you. Like, that's a part of, you've got to expect that, and it's going to be worth it in the end. And building the habit of morning pages, working through the exercise, at the heart, these all carry this growing sense of foundational rootedness and belonging, anchoring into what you're in the process of becoming. But you also need to anchor into the commitment to do these things as well, if you're going to reach that point where you kind of recover all of those things and join that artist's way. So in this moment when we're static, stuck, locked down, safely in the harbour, refuging, what does this make possible for us? What does it make challenging for us? How can we anchor more deeply into the life we want to bring about and the person we want to grow into? What are we anchored to that is perhaps keeping us from that person? These are kind of all messy and contradictory to some degree. And that's a part of what makes life beautiful, because this idea of an anchor is neither good nor bad. It might mean different things to different people at different times. Another thing I've been feeling in quite a major way over the past few weeks is wanderlust. I've kind of been feeling it to some degree for a long time, for a year or a couple of years. But since the lockdown, it's been exaggerated massively. I really want to hit the road and do some traveling, see the world. I guess there's an element of the thing of prohibition making desire stronger. When you can't do something, it suddenly becomes all the more desirable, and you feel the fact that actually you're being stopped from doing it all the more. You kind of dream of what life could be like if only there wasn't this obstacle in the way. And so I'm feeling that quite a lot. But yeah, it's also kind of making me think, actually, what matters? What's going to matter after this? What am I kind of moving towards, and that kind of stuff. So, that's Static as Stillness. The first song I'm going to play for you in this episode is called Best Days. It's from the Arrow of Time EP that I put out in 2017. I wrote about a friend of mine whose wife had been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and it's the kind of the process that they had to go through, the approach that they took to it, and he was kind of sharing with me about it, and the kind of acceptance that they had to have for this horrible situation, and the fact that all we have is now. And so I wanted to kind of write this. I mean, it was a song that just wrote itself as I started playing, but it was my effort to kind of make sense of that idea of all we have is now.
Take it one step at a time, place it one call at a time, don't you? You wake up one day and you find that then tomorrow you'll decline, won't you? So live like these are the best days of our lives, and we'll sing like it's not time to say goodbye. You'll never see yourself from me. You'll never see it like a failure of you. You never know what you achieved. Kissed our time together with a memory. So we'll live like these are the best days of our lives. We'll sing like it's not time to say goodbye. Come here, my love, keep dreaming, believing, casting it upon my heart again. A fading line, a reading, a feeling. I can't ever let you slip away. Come here, my love, keep dreaming, believing, casting it upon my heart again. A fading line, a reading, a feeling. I can't ever let you slip away. Come here, my love, keep dreaming, believing, casting it upon my heart again. A fading line, a reading, a feeling. I can't ever let you slip away. Come here, my love, keep dreaming, believing, casting it upon my heart again. A fading line, a reading, a feeling. I can't ever let you slip away. Live like these are the best days of our lives. Believing, casting it upon my heart. Sing like a fading time to say goodbye. A feeling. I can't ever let you embrace like it's the last dance of the night. Believing, casting it upon my heart. Love like we will never let this die. A feeling. I can't ever let you slip away. Can't let you slip away. Won't let you slip away. I can't let you slip away. Won't let you slip away. Let you slip away. Alrighty. So if you enjoy my music and you want to hear more kind of live stuff and hear me kind of share more free-formed thoughts about the songs that I write and perform, then head over to Patreon, where I do a kind of weekly bonus episode of the podcast, like extended play, private podcast. There's a feed that you can get there. And I just like share some thoughts, no script, unpack kind of reactions and thoughts to what's going on in my life, in the world around me, and that kind of stuff, what I'm writing, what I'm working on, and yeah, just respond to questions and thoughts that any of you share with me. And it's kind of a nice, a nice kind of place of where ideas incubate and that kind of stuff. And when you join, you get a whole archive of private episodes, Gentle Rebel interviews, other
bonus content, as well as me reading your name out in a future show, as I'm about to do for Bonnie, Marina Brink, Robin Pribicius, I hope I've pronounced that right, and Douglas Law, who all became patrons recently. Thank you so much to all of you. It really, really does mean the world. It helps massively to support the continued creation of this thing. So thanks, all four of you. If you'd like to hit similar levels of legend status, then just go to patreon.com, patreon.com/Andy Mort. Just $3 a month to get instant access to all of that stuff, or $10 a month if you want to get the video versions. So, yeah, before all that, I was speaking about static as stillness. We were thinking about the different sides of that idea, anchors, stasis, grounding, imprisonment, all that kind of stuff. So what about static as noise? This was the kind of first thing I thought of when Jacob Nordby used the word static in last month's episode. Static inboxes, static on social media. The kind of, I suppose in the inbox sense, for me it was like this static inbox because I don't have the energy to reply to anything. But it's also the static as in the noise, seeing especially things coming from companies, seeing the same messaging over and over again. And so static on social media, people caught in white noise loops. It's like this fuzz, everybody's saying the same thing and saying, kind of adding nothing. And so, yeah, on TV, it's the static is when it's impossible to see a clear picture. Everything's just fuzz. I remember when I was a kid and we had an analog TV, with buttons. We didn't even have a remote control on one of them. This was a common issue. Some channels, you could not tune into them. I remember Channel 5 when that first came on. It was just a terrible, terrible reception. You could see the picture slightly, but it was just snowing all the time. And, if the aerial was facing the wrong direction or, in bad weather or when birds decided they were going to land on the aerial and, bounce up and down on it and stuff, the picture would go fuzzy. The sound would become intermittent. And so for me, static, that's one of the main images that comes to my mind. And noise, it's one of the most frustrating things when you're trying to watch TV and it keeps coming and going, the picture, like it's so frustrating, really irritating, because it's out of your control in many respects as well, and you don't know when it's going to end, if it's going to end. According to some sources, the word noise comes from kind of the Latin nausea, disgust, annoyance, discomfort. Nausea, literally seasickness. So in keeping with the old vessel in the harbour metaphor. And yeah, according to other sources from Latin noxia, hurting or injury or damage. And another potential root is from nuisance, to injure, hurt, harm, damage. And so, this would the kind of nuisance would be used in reference to anything obnoxious to a community. So it's like a bad smell, pest, eyesores within a group. So it kind of then nuisance evolved to refer to a source of annoyance, something personally disagreeable. Used to refer to people as well. Someone can be a nuisance, which again makes sense in reference to noise. It's that irritant, something that frustrates the senses and is disagreeable. The thing you're like, oh, it's just noise. And I guess really noise is the way we interpret a sensory input, whether it's a sound, that's the kind of, the one we jump to mostly with noise, but it can also be smell, it can be taste, it can be a feeling, it can be emotion, stuff inside us. This can just work as noise. It's the subjective meaning that we apply to whatever is causing it. And to some degree, we get to choose what sort of meaning we give to these kinds of sensory inputs. So noise in this sense is static in our lives. It's the painful nuisances, repetitive, irritating, circular, inescapable. And the thing about noise, as I say, that makes it kind of most frustrating is when you lack a sense of when it's going to finish, when it's going to reach completion. There's a huge aspect to this in this situation. There's no clear sense of how long are we dealing with this? What does dealing with this look like? What comes next? How does lockdown easing work? What's that gonna what shape's that gonna take? So there's both this kind of sense of stillness static and white noise static involved here. There's this stillness, stasis, being stuck in one place, and the noise of this kind of noise of the whole situation and not knowing when that's going to ease. The static noise shows up in feedback loops and in attempts to kind of fill the void as well. Lots of things seem to have settled into more of a rhythm now. But I don't know if you felt this in the early days of the pandemic, where everyone was kind of making noise, clambering to, whether it was organising endless Zoom calls, doing live streams, celebrities trying to just get people's attention by singing Imagine and that kind of stuff. And while these things are still kind of going on, it feels like there's a kind of more rhythmic pattern to it all. I feel like we've all slotted into a better pace. But I mean, I do still feel aware of that, the pull of boredom to send people off on kind of thrill-seeking tangents, which involves a lot of noise. Stuff that keeps us entertained somehow scratches some kind of weird itch, like conspiracy theories and social media bandwagoning. You still seeing the kind of armchair expertise. I mean, we're all now experts on social distancing and immunization and epidemiology and all that sort of stuff, except obviously we're not. But we believe we are. And so, I mean, it's kind of weird when all this noise occurs. And I was struck by this a few days ago, in fact. Like, I'd seen someone someone liked something someone else had tweeted, if that makes sense. So on my Twitter feed, I'd seen, someone that I follow had liked someone else's tweet. And this tweet that they liked, said, I've just done my first COVID-19 funeral. So this person was a funeral celebrant, I think. Could I suggest a clap for funeral directors? They have to deal with infected bodies. They cannot maintain social distancing when carrying coffins, and the demands placed upon them have leapt exponentially. And I was like, oh, that's it. I mean, it's nice to get recognised because it really, we don't do a job that people want to see. So it's kind of a weird vibe. I don't think there's any need for clapping. It might just be me. I never have any need for that kind of external validation. I think it would seem kind of weird and inappropriate anyway, because it's like, actually, that it's kind of an element of failure in all of this when we're involved. But we still have to do the job within all of that, and it's really, really tough. And acknowledgement means a lot because, as I say, it is quite an overlooked profession, and it's hard work. And but the thing that really struck me about this was one of the replies beneath, as I'm talking about sort of armchair expertise. And this reply said, no, they don't have to deal with infected bodies. They're kept in local authority care for 48 plus hours until no longer infectious. But yes, they always do a great job and under more pressure now. And I just felt like, I don't know, it was just like the wind just taken from my sails, so to speak, in a kind of like, wow, that's really kind of, popping some kind of balloon. And I wish it was true. And my point isn't to debunk that, but just to raise awareness of our own susceptibility to armchair expertise, because it was like, actually, there's so much certainty in that response. Actually, no, they don't have to deal with infect. They're kept in local authority care, but yes, they do a good job, but you're wrong. And there's so much certainty in that people will believe it, but it's just not true because, in this I guess in this modern age of social media, easy to access information, we all become these kinds of experts. We all information shared. We might hear like a microcosm of something that's true to some degree in some situation, but it's, and then we extrapolate that and then apply it to everything. We're all experts on flattening curves and PPE and vaccines, except we're not. It's easy to believe we are because we know just enough to make us feel like we know everything. But as any expert in any field will tell you, as you become an expert, you realize how little you do know. But when we know just enough to be dangerous, we take what we read, we regurgitate it like it's truth. And that reply, if I didn't know better, sounds really reassuring and believable. If I didn't know better, I'd share it like it's true. And I'd be like, I'd correct people when they're saying, funeral directors are having to deal with infected. The actual truth is we do have to deal with infected bodies, and mostly bodies that we don't have any information about. So unknown quantities, picking up from nursing homes and in the community where COVID-19 is present and confirmed in some cases, but very, very rarely in the UK because there's no testing going on. Where COVID-19 is suspected, and where it's not suspected, only to later discover that actually, yes, that person was carrying the virus. And more than that as well, to be interacting with emotional family members who are understandably not thinking about your well-being or any potential spreading of infection. When you're sort of taking details, when you're dealing with them on funerals and stuff as well. It's the ultimate unknown situation. We don't have enough PPE to use for everything, but really should be. And there is a pressure to keep doing the job like we're invisible, which is, really the art of funeral workers, to blend in and pretend that you don't exist, which I think is why that's the way that I approach being a drummer as well. If you notice the drummer, then they're not doing a good enough job. If you notice someone who's working on a funeral, then they're maybe not doing a good enough job. But yeah, sorry to drift off on that little tangent. I guess maybe that represents my kind of mental place at the moment. And I guess it's just to say, let's check ourselves before we say things with certainty that we have no direct way to know for certain. This is the source of a real static noise, nonsensical fuzz, clouded truths, reinforcement of information that isn't wholly accurate. Even if it carries little elements of truth, like the noise comes when we just generalize and use that and just throw the whole thing at everything. And this can just lead to general murkiness and an inability to see the clear picture, the right picture. So, yeah, I mean, there's an element of stasis to consider in this context as well, which is that certain elements of the footprint that we create with our lives is static itself. Even as we're in the process of changing, as we go through our lives, we change, we evolve as people, we change our values, and we need to be open to be able to do that stuff, because otherwise, we become very, very stuck, imprisoned by our own past. And the things we say on social media, for example, it's always there under the guise that we said them, under the guise that what we said then is what we think now. And in this sense, our lives can look like a build-up of noise, contradictions, confusions, changes. We see this played out when we see tweets from 10 years ago dredged up to humiliate someone or to shame them in the present. Even if someone's genuinely changed, they might have genuinely grown out of where they used to be, and they're being slammed like that's what they said this morning, that's what they said yesterday. And this level of static noise means there's no clear picture that ever gets through. We can't see clearly, we can't hear clearly, we can't get a clear sense of a person, because we've got all of these kind of formative things available to us as we see one another developing in public in this sense, and the forming of ideas that we will go back on in the future. But because of the internet, it's there forever. This is dangerous because in a world of noise and fuzz, we lose touch with what truly matters and how we can truly connect with one another in meaningful ways. Every encounter becomes both catastrophic and empty. It's why we have so like such extremes in our world right now. You know, even the biggest, craziest events or revelations can soon become normalized and dismissed with a shrug of the shoulders because, well, do you know what? Whatever. Like, there's so much noise that is just one little as a part of the big. And so we become increasingly desensitized to life, watching it play out like a far-fetched drama, waiting and willing the next more and more absurd event to keep us entertained. This desensitization is terrible for us. This is one of the reasons minimalism is such an important thing for us to take seriously. You know, for us to become deeply intentional and discerning about what we let into our lives. To live lives where only the important stuff, the stuff that truly brings us value and meaning, is what we let in. It's only when we create gaps, margin, space between the notes of life, that's when we resensitize to the beauty, to the love, to the connection that we have to ourselves, to other people, and to the world around us. Otherwise, we just get completely bombarded and overwhelmed by static noise. This kind of stuff that just keeps us in place, keeps us thinking that we're going somewhere, but actually it's just noise. And this kind of desensitization, which is like floodwater gushing in, overpowering everything. Minimalism keeps our vessel from springing a leak. Because once water starts to get in, we'll quickly become flooded. We'll quickly sink under the overwhelming flow. We become completely ineffective and useless if we try to do everything, try to be everything, try to consume everything, have everything. Only when we step back, bring more space around our lives and commit ourselves to only those things that add real meaning and value to us and to which we can contribute value to the world, that's when we stem the flow, feel the joyful connection to life without the pressure to do more, to stay busy, to hustle, to win. Whatever the hell winning means in a world where apparent winning looks like losing to me. So yeah, that's static noise. I'm going to play another song, kind of refresh my head. And then I'll finish with the idea of static shock, just to keep the happiness flowing. This is a song I've really fallen in love with in a way that I'd never really connected to it before, and I've been revisiting it since getting my piano and playing some live streams. It's from my 2009 album. It's a song of hope, I guess, as far as as much as one of my songs feels like that, with a reminder that we can't see the light. When we can't see the light of the sun, it's not because the sun isn't there. It's just because our orientation has changed, or clouds have got in the way, or whatever. There is always possibility. There's always potential. There is always change.
Vague pick up pace. There is no one else returns. Breathe like we always used to. See through the eyes we used to. Don't blame the sun, it never fails. It's just cloud that comes and veils all the hope that lies above. Turned and twisted, argue, listed like someone else's words. You insisted, turned and twisted, argue, listed like someone else's words. Like we always used to. See through the eyes we used to. Don't blame the sun, it never fails. It's just cloud that comes and veils all the hope that lies above. What we see is what we love. We cannot look beyond. You insisted, turned and twisted.
Right, there you go. And the third static element is the shock. You know, we've all experienced static shocks, I imagine. Those little sparks of electrical discharge when you touch something like most helpful trick I learned was to touch the top of the car before putting my feet on the ground while getting out. You may well have known this for years and years. I learned it a few years ago when I get it bad in the summer. The kind of build up of electrical charge from, I guess, rubbing around the seat. And I was at work and I always get it on the private ambulance getting out. And I was always really frightened to shut the door because it would touch the metal after getting out because it's like, oh. And someone was like, yeah, just touch the top of the van while before putting your feet on the floor. And lo and behold, worked a treat. I remember when I stayed in Johannesburg in South Africa a few years ago visiting my parents. It was the start of the summer, and it was really, really dry. And I've never known anything like it. Static shocks happening all the time. Just, you move about like in the bed sheets, for example, and suddenly, it was kind of laughably painful. But it just, I mean, I guess with static shock, it doesn't take you long to become really wary and cautious of how you move and what you're about to touch. I brace myself when getting out of a car because of all of those static shocks from getting out. I'm tentative, even when I've touched the top of the van. That kind of habit of fear is still there. I've kind of had fun thinking of this metaphor and the different things to which we can apply it. A static shock occurs because there is an imbalance of charged particles between two surfaces. One is positively charged, the other is negatively charged, and the kind of idea of static is that the flow of the particles can't happen between the two surfaces until it does. But after such a build-up, the shock happens because there's lots of particles on each side, and then they neutralize, essentially releasing a spark. That's how I understand it anyway. I'm sure there's a science person ready to say, actually, I mean, you're kind of right, but technically it's not that. It's very different to that. So as long as I'm kind of right, that's all I need for this. Cool. Flashbacks to childhood there. Okay, anyway. So the shock is the end point. It's the release. It's the discharge of a process that's been building. The static is caused by the charges staying on one surface without flowing to another. We can identify this kind of static build-up in many areas of our lives, I reckon, where we move towards inevitable flashpoints. You can feel things building. If you're a people pleaser, you might have experienced this kind of thing. You go on, you're doing things for others. You're like, I'll do that. I'll do it. And this kind of resentment charge starts building up. Eventually, you might snap and discharge some of your fury that's built up as this growing sense of frustration over time. The giving on your surface, maybe the taking on someone else's surface, and then something happens that the static charge flies. These kinds of shocks are not ideal, are they? We really need to find ways to keep kind of touching the roof of the car at regular intervals to just kind of keep discharging those frustrations, those build-ups. But it's also right to accept and be aware that life isn't about perfect balance. There are going to be static shocks. These are par for the course. Life constantly throws up encounters where we carry a different set of particles about to someone else, to the next person. Another example might be of stinging unsolicited criticism. It feels like it's completely out of the blue, and it might give us that sense of a shock, like, ow, that really stings. We've been working on our thing, pouring all our electrical charge and our energy into this thing that we're creating, and we share it with the world. It encounters someone who isn't receptive to it, and there's a connecting spark that really catches a nerve. And you get enough of these, and you start to become hesitant. You start to become wary. You start to become afraid to get out of the car because you don't want to feel that shock hit you again. And we can become preoccupied with the fear of the shock. That can become more important than the action which may or may not lead to a shock. And so eventually we might just sort of kind of condition ourselves to never create things or to never share things because we are afraid of that, that movement, that our feet on the carpet, that kind of movement that builds up the energy that might then be neutralized by a shock. We might experience static shocks in our personal relationships, in our workplaces and other environments. When we encounter an imbalanced energy with another person that lets off a shock. It happens when we carry certainties around with us, doesn't it? And we meet others who carry different certainties around with them. I'm certain of my beliefs. You meet someone who's certain of their beliefs. You've got this imbalanced charge going on. And, we just can't seem to truly see one another. There's this stasis that stops us from truly connecting. During this particular time, as we face this global pandemic, we might find ourselves charging up, whether it's, watching the news, reading information, sharing information, having conversations, building up frustration simply by virtue of the fact that we are stuck, we are static, we are in this place, unable to do what we would normally do to let the flow of energy, our normal flow of particles, so to speak, to share that in the normal ways that we would. So there are these build-ups. I'm finding myself, as I say, more irritable at the moment. I'm getting more overwhelmed at certain times. And it's an interesting thing to observe within. I can almost feel the two charges occurring simultaneously within me as well. It's not just between me and someone else out there. On the one hand, there's this deep joy at the peace from having more time to myself, a quieter world to walk around. I get out there during kind of morning rush hour and walk or run, and I can cross roads that they'd normally be gridlocked, and I can cross them without catching sight of a single car. And this time of year is really beautiful too here in the UK. The spring, the sunset walk I had down to the supermarket a couple of evenings ago, the shop was really quiet and everyone was keeping a lovely distance. And off I went, listening to podcasts on a nice stroll home again, the sun setting, really nice evening breeze, warm enough to just be in a t-shirt. And it's just beautiful. But that's not everything. There's also this unsettled feeling in my gut, a claustrophobic desire to break free, stirring yearnings to travel, to see people, to hug people. I'm not massive on physical contact, but I've got this kind of thing within me. It's like, I just want to hug. And I can sense all of this stuff rubbing together within me like that proverbial thundercloud. Lightning sparks flying off around my head and in my heart. And I wonder if this is another reason many people are reporting more weird dreams right now. I'd seen a psychologist's interpretation of this, which is like, well, people are getting more sleep. They're waking up without alarms, which makes dream recall more likely. I'm not sleeping more. I'm still working. I'm using an alarm. I am using an alarm sometimes. But my dreams are still even more weird than usual. And my dreams are usually very, very weird. I don't think that kind of quite explains it. But static shocks within us, these contradictions that we carry are rubbing up against each other, perhaps in more overt ways. I don't know. There's all sorts of that stuff going on. Also, the static within society, between people. For me, I'm feeling a growing charge from my job. I feel the emotional impact of that right now in ways that I've never really felt before. And without all the usual available options for decompressing, for processing, for perhaps distracting as well. And all this without those things, it feels more amplified. These normal ways of neutralizing the imbalance, the imbalanced charges, I suppose. There are other sources of imbalanced charge too. I don't know if you've been experiencing this pressure to make the most of this opportunity that I mentioned earlier. I know from speaking to others that this can be a real source of anxiety for some people. I guess perhaps it's a weird sense of foreboding at a time that, we're going to return to normal at some point and everything's going to get busy again. And what if I waste this chance to get ahead on my goals? What if I don't write that book that everyone says I should be writing? Like, what if I waste this? And that pressure, that anxiety is massive. We've got to let go of it. Release that pressure. Remove that spark. Allow ourselves permission to give ourselves what we need to have, to just rest, to be, to reconnect, to recalibrate at the heart of our being. This is our chance to let go of the expectations and the pressures that normally engulf us. That's not to say don't do anything, but rather have a good reason for doing what you choose to do, how you choose to use this situation. And if it feels like, well, I'm doing it because I should be doing this, or otherwise people will leave me behind. If I don't do this, people will leave me behind. Everyone's really getting ahead. They're doing. If that's what you're telling yourself, experiment with rebelling against yourself, rebelling against that voice that's saying you should. Experiment with being left behind. You never know. Just because people are leaving you behind, it doesn't mean they're going the right way. They're just going to get to a pointless destination faster than you would have if you decided to follow them. Pick your own path. Carve out a purposeful journey within your own rhythm, within your own pace, without speed, without volume, without capacity. These key metrics of success that we seem to have, for some reason, adopted. It's all about doing it faster. It's all about doing it louder. It's all about doing more, adding more. It's like, actually, life's not about that. It's all about slowing down. It's all about creating more silence and stillness, space between the noise, between the notes. I think it's related. I feel like I want to mention it, though I'm not totally sure. But there is another thing that we must be mindful of too, which I've noticed in certain areas of life. We can use the idea of possibility as a positive catalyst for ourselves. This is what we talked about last time. What does this make possible? But this is also true of other people and organisations. I've seen companies attempt to use this as an opportunity to implement changes that they've been wanting to perhaps bring in for a while, but they've been unable to, find a solid, a good reason to bring it in, and there's been resistance to it. And I've been thinking about Naomi Klein's amazing book, Shock Doctrine, which I first read about 12 years ago. I say first read, it's the only time I've read it. But the main thread is around this idea of disaster capitalism, which she describes as using the public's disorientation following a collective shock, such as wars, a coup, terrorist attacks, market crashes, or natural disasters, using that to push through radical pro-corporate measures, often called shock therapy. This was uncovered as a conscious and deliberate strategy for essentially kind of walking vested interests into the heart of a situation, which after sufficient softening would mean little meaningful resistance. So there'd be kind of, I guess, people who would make a lot of money from particular contracts to rebuild stuff or to put companies into the heart of a place. And she talks about Hurricane Katrina being one of those disasters that was used in such a way. And the last song that I'm going to share with you is actually about Hurricane Katrina, and it was written back then, way back. When was that? About 2005, 2006. And yeah, it's kind of about the kind of human toll of such things, and the kind of the two-pronged issues that we have, which is the way the thing itself, and then the way that we respond to the thing, the way that we build afterwards. Does it bring us together? Does it make connection more possible? Does it make does it bring a place of compassion and love and good stuff, or do we kind of allow other things to just walk in through the door? It's in moments of great shock and trauma that we are susceptible to messages from people who connect emotively to where we're at and offer some kind of comfort or solution that either feels appealing, or we have an inability to stand against because the narrative of the collective has removed any potency of oppositional voices. The Shock Doctrine is a really good read, and applies to not just kind of this sort of corporate political stuff, but to all of our lives. I've used it as a metaphor in other ways as well. It's pretty hard going in places, but it's a really important source of awareness raising. And I often think about the presence of this in life. It's not always deliberate. It coincides with that idea of possibility, where we assess the question, what does this make possible? And it depends who's answering that question and how much power they have in the situation as to the heart and the values of the future that we then create out of any situation. Is it the future where our fear of getting shocked by a static discharge such as criticism, failure, shame or embarrassment outweighs the desire to pursue those things that matter most to us? Or is it one of curiosity, exploration, adventure? One where we connect and allow space for more compassion and understanding and community and grace. In other words, one where we live in accordance with our positive values, where they trump living in avoidance of our fears. Moments like this are usually good focusing experiences, which if we listen and take time to truly observe ourselves and notice our own thoughts and words, we can build off them, letting go of the things that don't serve our values and embracing the things that do. So I'm going to finish by playing End of a City, which is the song that I just mentioned. And the reason I've kind of revisited it recently because firstly, I did a live stream on Facebook a little while ago, and a guy called Russ asked me to play it, and I was like, I haven't played it for a very long time, so I'm kind of not prepared to do it. I'm not prepared, so I can't really do it, rather than I'm not prepared to do it. And but then I went and brought it back out and played it on the next live stream that I did, and it was like, I played it on the extended play, so the Patreon podcast, and finished it. I was like really struck by, the relevance of it today and in how we move forward within this situation, both within our own communities and within our countries and within the world as a whole. Like, what does this make possible, and are we holding people to account for the decisions that are made as we move forwards out of it? And is it going to be the people who are already suffering that are going to suffer more afterwards?
The strength of every man is proven. We can last the night alone. Building up the empire monument, made of finest silverstone. Bloodstained carpet wasn't bothered about the color of the skin from which the liquid red had drained, 'cause it was not returning. Golden intuition could not prescribe that you're on your own. Could not prescribe that you're on your own. Could not prescribe that you're on. You're on your own.
Okay, well, I think I'm going to leave it there. I hope you found some kind of support and encouragement in this episode. I know it's been a bit of a rambling one, but I'd love to hear from you. You know, how is static showing up in your life right now? And, are there any other ways that it's influencing things for you? Come and leave a comment in the show notes, send me an email, connect on social media, whatever you find most comfortable to you, really. Remember that the Haven closes in a few days' time. Find the weekly private feed of the podcast on Patreon. And most of all, take care of yourself. Take care of those around you. Be safe. Be well. And I'll be back again next time with another episode of the Gentle Rebel podcast. Until then, remember, you're an artist. The world needs your art. Now stay in and make somebody's day from wherever you are with whatever you have right now. I'll see you soon. Goodbye.
Angels in disguise, we can be, 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 we can all be angels in disguise, we can be.